Hi everyone. So in this video, I will talk about how to plot the aggregate demand curve for public good and private good. So I will use the same example as I used in the lecture notes. So first for the public good. So first this one is for public. The first part would be about the public good. For person A and person B, we are given two different demand curves, right? So for public good, the first step is to rewrite the demand curve into the inverse demand curve. That is, we need to rewrite A's demand curve into this form. That is, P is a function of Q. And also for B, P is a function of Q. And at each level of quantity, we need to find A's willingness to pay for one more unit of street light, and also B's willingness to pay for one more unit of street light. The aggregate willingness to pay would be the sum of A and B's willingness to pay, right? Sum of 6 and 8 is 14. And when the quantity is 1, A's willingness to pay is 5, B's willingness to pay for one more unit of street light is 6. And when we sum those two numbers up, we get 11. So when we do this one by one, we get a relationship between the quantity provided and the aggregate willingness to pay. So when we found those points on this graph, we can plot the aggregate demand curve for street light. For example, if the quantity is 0, then the aggregate willingness to pay would be 14. If the quantity is equal to 1, then the aggregate willingness to pay would be 11. So here is the kink. Why I call here is the kink? Because when the quantity is 4, A's willingness to pay for one more unit is 2. B's willingness to pay for one more unit is 0. Then the aggregate willingness to pay would be equal to A's willingness to pay. And also, if the quantity is 5, A's willingness to pay for one more unit is 1. B would be willing to pay nothing for one more unit of street light. Then the aggregate willingness to pay would be still A's willingness to pay, right? So what I want to say is that when the quantity is greater than 4 but less than 6, then the aggregate demand curve is exactly the same as A's demand curve. Because during this range, B would be willing to pay nothing for that. So that's for the public good. And why we say that the public good may lead to market failure. So see this paragraph for more explanation. For example, if the price of street light is 8, then the A would demand 0 because Q equal to 6 minus 8 would be minus 2, but the quantity would not be negative. So the QA would be 0. And QB would be equal to 4 minus 0.5 times 8 would also be 0. So that means if the price of street light is equal to 8, then neither of them would be willing to pay for the street lights. So that is the market failure. Then the second part of this video, I will talk about the aggregate demand curve for a private good. And also we will use the same example in the lecture notes. The difference between a private good and a public good is that for public good, everyone consumes the same amount of goods. So once a public good is provided, everyone consumes this good. So we need to determine the individual's willingness to pay for that good and sum them up. So here, as we can see, for public good, we need to determine individuals' willingness to pay for that good at a different level of quantity, and then we need to sum them up. That would be the aggregate willingness to pay. However, for private good, once a private good is provided, the price is fixed. Because in a private good market, the market is totally competitive. Each consumer is a price taker. They cannot decide the price. The amount is depending on everyone's demand. The amount of quantity is depending on everyone's demand at that price. So we need to determine the sum of quantity demanded at each level of price. So as we can see the example for the demand of bread. For person A and person B, we are given two different demand curves. For example, for person A, P is equal to 4 minus Q, but we need to rewrite the equation into this form. Q is equal to 4 minus P, write Q as a function of P. And also for B, we need to write Q as a function of P, because we need to find everyone's demand at a different level of price. So in this table, if the price is equal to 0, then A's demand would be 4. B would demand 6 units of this good. And if the price is equal to 1, A would demand 3 units, B would demand 5 units. If the price is equal to 5, A would demand 0, and also B would demand 0. And then we aggregate the amount A demands and the amount B demands. That would be the aggregate demand. When we sum those two numbers up, that would be our aggregate demand. So as we can see, from this table, we can find a relationship between price and aggregate demand, right? So if the price is equal to 0, then the aggregate demand would be equal to 10. Would be equal to 10. So if the price is equal to 1, the aggregate demand is equal to 8. If the price equal to 2, the aggregate demand is 6. So also here we also have a kink. When the price is so high, for example, the price is when the price is higher than 4 and less than 6, A would demand no quantity for bread, because for person A the price is so high. for person B at a price of 4, he would demand 2 units of bread, and when the price is 5, he would demand 1 unit of bread. So the aggregate demand would be exactly B's demand of bread at price 4 and 5. So as we can see in this graph, the aggregate demand curve for price higher than 4 but less than 6, the aggregate demand curve would be exactly B's demand curve. So that's all for the private good. That is, at each level of price, we need to find the quantity demanded for each person. The sum of those demands is the aggregate. The sum of those demands is the aggregate demand curve for the private good.